The human from a dungeon chapter 8, this is the arena, Nash said, gesturing around him. When Nash had mentioned where we were going, I had expected something shaped like the Colosseum. Instead, it was a dirt patch encircled within a wooden fence. Leaning on the fence were a few orcs who were interested in what we were doing. Great, now I'm going to get my ass kicked in front of an audience. I think we should begin unarmed, just in case, Yelk said with his trademark grin. If he does well, we can move on to practice weapons, I agree. Alright, Nick, take a stance. I'm going to try to hit you. You can either dodge or counterattack, Nash said, widening his stance. Ready? No. I stated flatly, too bad. Begin. I dropped into the karate stance I was familiar with and Nash rushed forward. He threw a punch, but as he began to move his fist to my face, it slowed down. Even so, I barely managed to move out of the way. The wind from his punch made me blink. Good time dilation unlocked, job. You managed to dodge. That's promising, Nash said. What did you say? I asked, rubbing my ears. What, have you gone deaf? I didn't even hit you, he replied. No, I don't know. I thought I heard something. Doesn't matter, let's go again. Try to counterattack this time. Don't hold back, it's not like you can hurt me, he said with a laugh, famous last words. Yelk muttered with a smirk. Nash glared at Yelk for a moment and then turned back to me. He dropped into his stance, and the moment I did the same, he rushed forward. As he threw his punch, time slowed down again. I fought my urge to jump out of the way and instead moved my head to the side to avoid the blow. Then I threw a punch of my own. I meant to hit him in his solar plexus, but my fist went slightly lower. It was as if it were moving by itself. I connected and felt his body tense up as if I had struck his diaphragm, but he rushed past me instead of doubling over. Breathtaker strike unlocked, dash, what the fuck was that? A voice? No. More like, static in headphones when you have them too loud. Just behind the music. I should ask Nash about it. I turned to him and paused. He was standing up, but rigid and unmoving. Nash? You okay? Yelk asked with a shit-eating grin. Nick didn't hurt you, right? 'Cause you're too big and strong, right? Nash glared daggers at Yelk and opened his mouth to retort, but the only sound that escaped was a groan. He snapped his mouth shut and doubled over, placing his hands on his knees to steady himself. Then he began gasping for air. Yelk and the onlookers began laughing uncontrollably. After a few moments, Nash sat down and looked at me with a mixture of anger and confusion. What in the hell was that? He asked. I don't know. I think it was called a breathtaker strike, I answered. Remember what the distorted voice thingy had said? Well, it definitely did that, Nash said as he stood back up. Okay, I'll admit, you're not bad with hand-to-hand. When did you learn how to do that? I took karate. I used it more for working out than actual fighting, though. Karate? You ever heard of that skill, Yelk? Nash asked, glaring at the still laughing sorcerer. No, Yelk said, between laughs. I haven't. Probably something from his world, but maybe an unarmed specialist would know more. It's not a skill. Well, not what you mean by skill, I interrupted. With karate, there's a chance to do it wrong. But when I went to hit you, I thought your solar plexus was higher up, but my hand moved on its own to where it actually is. Yeah, that's how skills work. The skill will only activate when the circumstances are right for it to be able to do its thing, Nash explained. So the name of that skill is karate, huh? No, the skill's called breathtaker strike. Karate is a form of martial art. Like, a style of fighting, I explained to their blank faces. Right. Well, never mind the jargon, you've got both magical and martial prowess, Yelk said with what was quickly becoming a trademark grin. I dunno, magicians also have some hand-to-hand combat skills. Nash tapped his chin. Let's try you out with a sword. A sword? Surely a spear would be better? Yelk asked. A spear is too easy to learn. If we really want to know what he can do, we should see if he is able to unlock any sword skills, Nash explained as he grabbed 2 wooden swords and tossed one to me. I'm fine with that, I said as I caught the practice sword. You really shouldn't be, Yelk warned. I fear that Nash is trying to get back at you for embarrassing him. Nash grinned widely at me as I took my stance and immediately disappeared from view, leaving only a small cloud of dust in his wake. I panicked and rolled forward, barely managing to avoid the blow that would have hit me directly on the ass. I glared at Nash as I regained my stance. I swung wildly at him, but he deflected my blow with ease and danced back with a laugh. I tried to remember something that could help me land a blow, but nothing came to mind. I'd seen plenty of movies with sword fights, but I knew better than to think that those were accurate portrayals. Nash charged at me and swung hard, but I managed to block it and lock blades with him. His smile widened as he grabbed the end of his blade and used the additional leverage to shove me back several feet. Hey! That's cheating! You can't grab the blade, I shouted. Why not? He asked, confused. Because if it were a real sword, you'd cut yourself. I had said it loud enough that every orc watching had heard me. After a second of stunned silence, they all began to laugh at me. I looked at Yelk, Nash, and the onlookers trying to figure out why they were laughing so hard. Nash was laughing so hard that he was doubled over, and I briefly considered smacking him upside the head. This is your first time fighting with a sword, isn't it? Nash finally settled down enough to ask, yeah, well, you can grab a blade without cutting yourself. The trick is to make sure you don't drag your hand along the sharp bit. How else are you to use the pommel? He asked with a chuckle. I looked at the hilt of my sword and saw that it did indeed have a round bulb at the bottom. I thought this bit was to make sure your hand doesn't slip, I said. No, it's to bash armor. Like a mace, Nash explained, demonstrating a swing while holding the blade. The secret to sword fighting is knowing how you can hold your weapon, not how you should hold it. Whatever grip works is the one you should use in any given situation. I see, let's go again, he shouted as he charged me. I managed to duck his swing and went for a stab to his midriff. He spun to avoid the stab and grabbed my goddamned blade. Oh, come the fuck on! I shouted. He grinned as he pointed the tip of his sword at my face. I pulled hard on my sword, but it didn't budge, and then I felt the tip of his sword poke me in the forehead. I sighed as the orcs once again laughed at my efforts. I began to get frustrated as Nash pushed me back and gestured for me to try again. Again and again he outwitted and outmaneuvered me, but I was learning. The tricks he was using weren't going to work twice. Then I felt something. Is this what they call an opening? I knew what to do, how to hold my sword, where to put my feet, and how fast to move. I pushed myself as fast as I could, and I was finally able to put the tip of my sword on his chest. Dash unlocked, dash. Well, would you look at that, Nash said with a look of shock. Was that the dash skill? Yelk asked. I think so, I answered. He does have martial and magic prowess after all. Yelk said excitedly. That's really rare, you know. It sure is, Nash added. Well, for us, anyway. For all we know, all humans are able to use both magic and martial skills. Although, the only way to find out for sure is to find more humans and ask them. Speaking of which, are we able to go into the dungeon? I asked. No, both orcs replied in unison. I was stunned by the rapid and uniform response for a moment. The brothers looked at each other and then back to me. Nash squatted down to my height to make eye contact. I suppose he was trying to relate. But it felt infantilizing. There are a lot of things we need to do before you're able to go into the dungeon, Nick. First, we need to register you with the Adventurers Guild to see what level you are. Then we'd need to train you up a bit more. Getting a sucker punchin' on me is impressive in a way, but there's many things in the dungeon that your breathtaker strike won't work on. Indeed, it would be better to start you off with the wastes. The monsters there can be tough at times, but it's much easier to get away from them than it is to escape the ones in the dungeon, Yelk explained. I opened my mouth to protest before I realized that I was about to act like the young punks in movies that cause trouble for everyone by not realizing their very obvious limitations. I closed my mouth and nodded sullenly instead. I don't know how time passes in this world in relation to mine, but if I rush things and end up dying, then I won't get to see Cass again. Even if I were to reincarnate again, what would be the odds of ending up back on my world and my body? That being said, you've met the chief and been adopted into Clan Alta. There really isn't anything stopping us from registering you as an adventurer right now, Yelk said while tapping his chin. Yeah, Chief probably can't get mad at us for getting our brother registered, right? Nash asked. True. I don't recall anyone having to get permission from the chief before, Yelk grinned as he stood. Let's go. Are y'all talking about registering that thing with the guild? One of Orcs shouted, what about it? Nash replied, the guild rep's out right now. Family trouble. She'll be back in a week or two. It'll have to either wait or register as freelance. Both Yelk and Nash winced at this. It seems that the thought of registering as a freelancer didn't sit well with them. They mumbled to each other for a bit and then turned to look at me with grim faces. We're gonna have to wait. Nash stated, what? Why? What's so bad about being a freelancer? I demanded. Being a freelancer isn't bad, Yelk said as he placed a hand on my shoulder. It's terrible. The various organizations that allow registration as an adventurer all have one thing in common. They're employee-operated. When you join a guild, union, militia, or whatever other name the organization goes by, you are working for and with your fellow adventurers. When you register as a freelancer, you are working directly for your customers. That's how it is back home, I explained. That's not so bad, you know. No, you don't understand, Nash said, crossing his arms. When you're with an org, you get access to benefits like healers, days off, mental health checks, specialized equipment for jobs, and all sorts of things that make adventuring bearable. Even if you're a member of a nation's military, you're taken care of to some extent. But when you're a freelancer, you have to pay for those benefits on an individual basis. You have to buy your own gear and pay for its maintenance. You can only take days off if you've worked long enough to be able to eat the next few days. To top it off, you only make about half what other adventurers make, if you can even find work at all. He's right, Nick. Usually, if someone goes freelance, it's because they've committed a crime that has resulted in being barred from org membership. Yelk squeezed my shoulder a little. On top of that, the most frequent customers of freelancers are those whose jobs have been rejected by orgs. Usually because the customer can't pay a fair price for the work, or the work is illegal. You want to go into the dungeon, right? Yes, as soon as possible, I answered. Well, there you have it. Entering the dungeon simply won't be possible as a freelancer. Guilds don't work with freelancers as a rule, and even the chief would be hard-pressed to convince them to allow you to tag along. If Nash and I were able to get permission to enter, we wouldn't be able to bring you along without getting censured, and getting censured sucks, Nash added. Very bad for your career. I sighed at the prospect of waiting 2 weeks before being able to register as an adventurer. I had hoped that I could register as a freelancer and then join a guild, but not only does that sound impossible, it sounds like it wouldn't speed things up at all. So what do I do? I raised my hands in a shrug. You train, Nash said. Magic and martial in equal portions. We'll work on figuring out which weapons you'll be best at, and unlocking new spells for you to cast. Great, more training with Nash. The Human from a Dungeon Chapter 9. I gazed longingly out of my window at the mountains in the distance, a wall of gigantic snow-capped teeth separating the Orcish high chiefdom of Kirkina from the elven kingdom of Balasur. As a youth I would trek those very mountains, hunting dangerous game and living in the rough. It was the best childhood the son of a high chief could ask for, and my father had given it to me gladly. Mostly because he couldn't stand children, but also because he wanted me to be strong enough to take his place. My gaze returned to the mountain of paperwork upon my desk. A much more difficult climb, with higher stakes as well. Paperwork is boring, but if it's done wrong or delayed, many can suffer. I envy the chiefs of small villages, who rarely have to do any paperwork at all. Although they have to listen to complaints in person rather than reading a strongly worded letter, so we'll call it a draw. A knock on my door alerted me to Raisin's presence. One of many aides that helped me keep things running. I glanced at him and he said, "Sir, you've received a missive from Emperor Jack, Slayer of Demons, Savior of Dwarves, Destroyer of..." Yes. Jack has many impressive and lengthy titles. A missive, eh? He finally figured out that I can read, then? I asked with a chuckle. "Looks that way, High Chief." Raisin gave me the envelope containing the missive, and I felt a tinge of dread as I noted its thickness. I broke the wax seal with a claw and pulled the contents out into the light. 20 pages, gods damn it, this had better not be about that damned mine or I'm gonna declare war, I swear. I roared, "Sir, it's almost definitely about the mine." "You've been ignoring his requests regarding it for years," Raisin said calmingly. I turned to glare at him. "That's because he wants us to let his people mine the metal while giving us a percentage of the metal as a tax. Considering that it is our mine and we know how to mine, I see no reason to pay him any heed. Come on, sir, you know his people can mine better than we can. Most of our miners think that the dwarves will be able to pull more metal out than we can, too. Might end up with more as tax than we would doing it ourselves, is that right?" I said sarcastically. "And we might as well let the damned elves construct our buildings and the fucking gnomes run our economy, right? And what's left for us, eh? Dungeon running? Scavenging the wastes? And what do we do if the drow decide that they need to lengthen their border? Will we be able to rely on the dwarves, elves, or gnomes to come to our aid?" "No, sir," Raisin stated with the attitude of someone dealing with a toddler. "Exactly. If he wants to be involved in the mine, he can teach our miners how to do it," I grumbled as an idea popped into my head. "Wait, that's not a bad idea. We can offer to hire his dwarves as supervisors and trainers, and give them a much smaller percentage. Have Paolo meet with the Miners' Guild and come up with some numbers. Then have a missive drawn up in reply to whatever this garbage says." "Yes, High Chief," Raisin nodded as he left. I nearly threw the missive across the room, but decided that I had better check it first. It was too polite to have been written by Jack. Like most dwarves, he can't help but curse constantly. I chuckled at all the titles they had for me. It felt good to be recognized even if it was just for flattery. The actual content of the missive was indeed about the mines, but it also contained a warning regarding the drow. They were performing military maneuvers again. I'd have to increase our presence on that border. I made a note to include a gratuity to Jack for the information. Despite how annoyed we are at each other, our people are friends, and what impacts us impacts them. The drow taking a bite out of us means less trade for them, and a higher risk of the drow taking a bite out of them as well. Unfortunately, that doesn't mean they'll fight them with us. The Dwarven Empire of Calcutta was more into manufacturing than they were into warfare. There were other dwarven kingdoms that were more focused on warfare, but those kingdoms didn't have an Orcish high chiefdom as their neighbor. If they did, their tune would likely change pretty quickly, well, so long as those orcs were fight-focused. There's plenty who aren't. My grandfather is considered one of the most peaceful mayor to have ever lived. Actually, come to think of it, he might have been able to convince those kings to become peaceful just by his example alone. I chuckled at the thought, and another knock shook my door. What is it? I demanded. Hi Chief, there's a messenger from Niliva, Raisin said breathlessly, as if he'd ran back here. You're going to want to hear this in person, Niliva? The name was familiar, but from where? One of mine? Would have to be a small settlement then. Oh, don't tell me that one of the chiefs was dumb enough to make a village on the Drow border. Raisin noticed my confusion and explained, Niliva is the village we installed at the entrance to the Delver's dungeon. Oh? What do they want? I asked. My question was met with a look of exasperation. I returned the look with a glare, but Raisin is as stubborn as a pregnant fathorns. It occurred to me that we were both somewhat in the wrong. Fine, fair enough. Bring them in, I relented. Raisin turned to the outside of the door and gestured to someone out of view, then fully entered the room. A minute later a monstrous orc in darkened full plate entered and kneeled. It took me a second to recognize him. Alern, son of Agurno. My nephew. Alern took a moment before finally saying, Greetings High Chief Ulermak, son of Grashna, the giant, savior of— That's enough of that Alern, I interrupted. My own kin shouldn't have to prostrate themselves before me. As I understand it, you have a message for me? Yes, sir, Alern said and looked up at me. We've encountered some oddities in the Delver's dungeon and Chief Gluern sent me to apprise you. I'd forgotten that Gluern took over for his brother on the Delver project. The thought of that hot head being a chief was enough to amuse even the most stoic orc. Unfortunately, my amusement was dashed by the stench of grief coming from Alern. The boy who was normally cheerful and gentle was now robotic and stiff. His smile replaced by a grim expression that spoke of loss. I nodded to Raisin, who grabbed a cushion and set it next to the boy. Sit and explain, Alern. What happened? I said gently, Yes sir, he replied as he sat cross-legged on the cushion. A while ago a wall collapsed in the dungeon, revealing a previously hidden passage. He explained at length about what had happened, and with every sentence my concern grew. A sentient thing called a human had been found and removed from the dungeon, and a boss that killed 2 over-10s had been encountered. Gluern's plan to seal the passage to the boss was a sound one, but it might be a stopgap. Especially since it sounded like the dungeon had already shifted twice. And the hidden portion didn't change. Does Niliva have any over-20s? I asked once he finished. No, sir. Delver's was labeled an entry-level dungeon. The only reason that Gluern had over-10s at his disposal was because we became adventurers there, Alern said, gritting his teeth to stifle a sob. I'm sorry about your comrade, dear nephew. He will be avenged. If you'd like to be on the team I send, I can convince the adventurers to allow it. No, sir. I would only be a hindrance. That beast is my exact counter. Just like Kurosaka was, a fool would think this to be cowardice, but I saw it for what it was. A warrior who knew he was outmatched and responsible enough not to weigh down those who would be fighting. Little Alern had grown into a very good orc indeed. Raisin, have Elizabeth gather a group of over-20s who are a good match for this thing and prepare to send them to Niliva. Alern, you'll rest here and travel back with the group we send. Let Gluern know that they answer directly to me, and he is to provide them with food, water, and shelter. I'll handle their pay. Understood? Yes, High Chief, Alern and Raisin said simultaneously. Raisin immediately set about his new task, and Alern rose from the cushion. He picked it up and put it back, like the responsible mayor I know him to be. He then turned back to me, waiting to be dismissed. How's your father, boy? I asked. I wouldn't know, sir. Haven't heard from him in 2 years, he said, finally smiling. I grinned back. Agurno, my little brother, was legendarily aloof. He cared but didn't know how to show it, and simply decided it would be best if he didn't. Alern's not his only child, but since his mother has been patient enough to handle the long disappearances, he's the one who's seen the most of his father's love. Which is probably why the boy couldn't resist chuckling at his father's foibles. Well, that's good news then. If something had happened, it would have been heard across the entire continent. We both laughed at the truth of that statement. Agurno had become an adventurer instead of a chief, and quickly showed onlookers why it isn't fair for someone of my bloodline to become one. His last big fight had been against a corrupted high dragon, and it had left scars in the landscape that still haven't healed. Even his son was a powerhouse, and was one of the youngest over 10s in history. If Alern had turned out to be a bit faster, that monster in Delvers wouldn't have stood a chance. We discussed the rest of Alern's family, and how his career had been going. He recounted tales of fights in the wastes against gigantic beasts, and funny stories involving his comrades. Then we discussed how the nation was faring, and I was careful not to go into too much detail regarding the troubles with the drow. Finally, our conversation came to a close. I think I'll head to the chow hall. I've missed the fat horn steak you have here, Alern said with a chuckle. Right, I replied with a chuckle. Oh, and Alern, I understand that the human has been adopted into the Alta family. But I'd still like to know more about it. I don't mind how this happens, whether it be an informal interrogation or if we arrange a meeting. But I don't like mysteries, yes, High Chief. I'll do what I can, Alern nodded and left. I rested my chin on my hand as I thought about the future of our nation. Was this human a good omen or a bad one? The latter seemed somewhat likely, considering what else had been found in that secret passage. I was distracted by this line of thought until my eyes once again rested on the mountain of paperwork on my desk. Damn. Well, back to work. The Human from a Dungeon Chapter 10. I gazed up at the lovely afternoon sky and sighed. The sun, which was shining brightly as if it were content with its existence, was floating in a sea of light blue. Puffy little clouds slowly floated by without a single care in the world. I, on the other hand, was looking up at the sky because Nash had once again planted me firmly upon my back. I heard him jump and quickly rolled. His axe buried itself into the ground where I had just been. Wooden or not, that would have hurt. I got back to my feet and time slowed down once again. He's open, and I'm mad. I activated slide slash and raked my sword directly across his exposed midriff, just under his belly button. I felt elation at my victory, and then a fist slamming into my forehead. Darkness clouded my vision and I blinked a few times to clear it. Once again, I found myself involuntarily cloud-watching. It occurred to me that this was becoming a very familiar sight. I sighed as I got back onto my feet. I think that'll about do it, Nash said, holding his stomach. You're getting better. Slowly but surely, it's going pretty quick to me. Yelk shouted from the edge of the arena. It's only been a couple weeks, and he's already able to land a killing blow on you. True, but that's due to his skills rather than his skill, Nash nodded sagely. Once he saw our dumbfounded expressions, he clarified. I mean that his knowledge of fighting is low, but his skills themselves are decent. Especially that time diminution skill, time dilation, I corrected. But you're right, I need more practice. We had spent the last 2 weeks trying to unlock more skills, and so far we'd been able to get 3. Dash, power slash, and slide slash. Yelk and I had also been working on magic, which had led to me getting better at hearing that strange muffled voice as well. It announced whenever a skill had been unlocked, and my brothers had no idea what it could be. Neither of them had ever heard anything like it. They'd both been somewhat concerned when I brought it up, but they seemed to get over that concern when I revealed the latest development. Whenever I thought hard about which skills I had, a list of them would appear in a semi-transparent rectangular box. When I thought about a specific skill, it would open another box with a brief explanation of the skill. I thought of the time dilation skill and the explanation popped up almost immediately. Time dilation I increases the user's speed to 150% for a very limited time. Cooldown, 5 minutes. Hey, Nash, do skills level up? I asked. Level up? Not that I know of. You get better at using them the more you use them. Though. Like your muscles or your brain, he answered, pointing at his head. It's just, when I check the status of my skills, some of them have a number 1 at the end of them, I said as Yulk walked up to us. Which implies that the number might get larger if the right circumstances are met, Yulk interjected. Very interesting. Which skills are you speaking of? I pulled up my list of skills and listed off the ones with a number. Time dilation, fireball, dash, earthen dagger, wind spear, and heal. Interesting, Yulk said. Well, with dash, the more you use it the farther and faster you can go, Nash pointed out. Maybe it's tracking your progress or something. Yes, I think that's it. Yulk agreed. Fireball, earthen dagger, and heal are similar. The more you heal people, the better you get at it. The more you use fireball, the bigger and hotter it can get, and the more you use earthen dagger, the deadlier the blade that forms. Well, I'm still worried that nobody else seems to have anything like this, I said. My brothers looked at each other and back to me as if they didn't hear me properly. Then they started laughing uproariously. I waited for them to stop, but they kept going until tears came out of their eyes. Nash fell to the floor and started rolling. Yulk fell to his knees. After a few more moments I lost my temper. What the hell is so funny? I demanded. Oh no, I'm gonna die, Yulk said between laughs. He says he's worried. Nash shouted before falling into another laughing fit. It's a valid concern. I shouted, making them laugh even harder. I crossed my arms and waited for them to finally collect themselves. Once they were done laughing and had got back up off the ground, I glared at them. They wiped their tears and patted the dirt off of themselves and turned back to me. When you first mentioned the voice talking to you, I thought you might be crazy, Nash said. Same, actually. Hearing non-existent voices is a sure sign of madness. But then you mentioned seeing the box thingies, and I knew it had to be something else. Madness takes advantage of what you know. It can't show you things that you don't know, Yulk explained. Yeah, but what if it's what? A trap? What the hell is there to worry about? Nash laughed again. If it's a trap, you're boned, boy. It's already taken hold, so the only thing to do is lean into it and hope for the best. He's right. It's a useful tool. Worrying about it is like worrying about having a whittling blade, Yulk chuckled. Oh no, what if I cut my finger? Well, what if someone else finds out and tries to take it or something? I asked. Then we kill them, Nash said flatly. Or they kill us. No different than any other situation, really, indeed. There's always someone willing to take something you own. To worry about owning it would result in owning nothing, Yulk nodded. Well, what if they kill you too and capture me to use as a lab rat? Easier said than done, but in that case just make yourself uncapturable, Nash sneered. How? I pleaded, fight them with every breath and don't pull your punches. Make it clear that either they kill you or you kill them, he explained, and even if they do manage to capture you through some sort of trickery, attack them every chance you get. Make certain that they have to constantly be on their toes. It'll exhaust them eventually. Then you avenge us or join us, Yulk grinned. Before I could continue arguing, I noticed one of the orc bystanders waving to get our attention. The size of our audience had grown a lot in the last 2 weeks. And Nash had even received requests to host our training sessions at certain times of the day. Of course, he ignored these requests and simply said that training happens when it happens. I pointed out the bystander to my brothers, and they started waving us over. Wanting a break from training with Nash, I started walking over immediately. As I got closer, I noticed that the waving orc was actually Irana, the local blacksmith. Unlike most of the orc women, Irana was always fully clothed. Probably due to her profession, but it's an awkward thing to ask, so I don't know for sure. She gave me a wide grin as I approached. "Hey Nick. I've got you a present," she exclaimed. She held out an object wrapped up in brown cloth. There was quiet metallic clank as I took the gift. It was about the length of my arm. Just looking at it, I thought it must be a mace, but then I noticed a small curve on one end. Excited, I unwrapped the gift and grinned when I held up the sword. It was a cutlass, like the kind that pirates use in the movies. The scabbard was made of blackened leather with brass fittings on both ends. The brass on the entrance to the scabbard had a skull and intersecting sabers, and on the other end it had crossed daggers. The handguard and hilt were also made of brass, and the handguard featured a nude woman blowing clouds from her mouth and a ship's rigging behind her. The spaces between rope and cloud were actually carved through, and the edges of these holes were sharpened. "Thank you. This is amazing." "What's the occasion?" I asked, awestruck. "It's a thank you for the entertainment that you've given us for the last couple of weeks. Watching you fight Nash and sling spells on my breaks has been great," she explained, with a murmur of agreement coming from the crowd. "Well, that's out of character for you." Nash grumbled. "What happened to the miserly Irana we all know?" "Oh, I'm still miserly," she grinned. "This cutlass was commissioned by an elf, but he failed to pay in full. There's not a lot of call for cutlasses, with half-basket guards around these parts. I'd have to travel to a coastal city to be able to sell it, but it's not worth it to travel that far to sell one blade. So I figured I'd free up the inventory space, show my gratitude, and give Nick one hell of a starting weapon. Win-win-win, yeah, and I'm sure it has nothing to do with currying favor with a new adventurer so that he prefers your shop over the much more reasonably priced shops in the village," Nash said. "You're confusing reasonably priced with cheap. The other shops get their blades from random places and people. I make my own, and they're much better than anything you'll find at those shops," she shot back. "But I can't expect someone whose intellect is rivaled by rocks to understand something like." As they argued, I unsheathed the blade to have a look at it. The steel gleamed in the sunlight, and even with my uneducated eyes I could tell it was well made. I turned around and gave it a few practice swings, grinning like an idiot at the swooshing sound it produced. It made me feel ready to take on anything. "Well?" Yelk asked over the sounds of Nash and Irana arguing. "I like it," I replied, practicing a punch with the handguard. "It's a really good sword." "Good to hear," Yelk grinned. "I heard that the guild lady's back." "You want to go get registered?" "Yes," I said, sheathing my sword. "Well, let's go," Yelk said in a whisper. "If we hurry, Nash won't even notice we're gone." "Yes, I fucking will," Nash growled. "Where are we going?" "To the Adventurers Guild to get me registered," I answered. "Fine," Nash said, with Irana giving him a smug look. "Oh, wait, hold on. You'll be wanting to see the chief before you get registered," Irana interrupted. "We don't require his permission to get Nick registered. He's officially part of the Alta clan now," Nash argued. "You thick fuck, just because you don't have to doesn't mean you don't have to. Or would you rather Nick have difficulty finding a first job because Gluern's pissed at you?" She crossed her arms. "Or maybe you'd rather that first job be hunting giant rats?" "Oh no," I whispered. "Why's it always rats?" "Huh?" Nash asked with a degree of hostility in his voice. "Nothing," I quickly replied, knowing he wouldn't get the joke. "Let's go see the chief." "There's no harm in it, right?" Nash actually growled and turned away from the conversation. Losing 2 arguments in a row against Irana had to be bad for his ego. It was certainly bad for his mood. We all quietly decided to give him a few moments to calm down. "Fine," he finally shouted. "Fuck it, let's go see the chief." And so we did. We still got stares along the way, but some of those stares were followed by a wave. I hadn't exactly been a social butterfly, but getting dragged around by Nash and Yelk had resulted in making a few new friends. Like Irana the blacksmith, Korno the chef, and Moltova the merchant. When we finally got to the chief's chambers, we were told we couldn't go in immediately. Yelk and Nash shared a look of concern with each other. After 10 minutes or so, an orc rushed out without even looking at us. He was wearing a bright green bandana around his neck with 2 horses rearing away from each other on the back. He was followed by Alern, who gave us a nod as he passed. We were then ushered in to see the chief. The diabolical duo seems to have transformed into the troublesome trio. Very good timing as well, but we'll get to that. What brings you here? Chief Gluern asked. We want to register Nick with the Adventurers Guild, Nash answered. Irana told us to see you first. Gluern chuckled. Well. Isn't this a remarkable coincidence? I was right about to send for you regarding this very issue. You want Nick to register as an adventurer, because High Chief wants you to arrange a meeting between himself and Nick. Yelk asked, ducking a thrown goblet. Don't spoil my reveals, sorcerer. Gluern shouted, why would I have to register as an adventurer, to see the High Chief? I hesitantly asked. A bunch of reasons, Nash explained. There are routes which shave weeks off of your travel time that civilians aren't allowed to use, because they're dangerous. Most of the adventuring organizations can grant permits to travel these roads, thanks to negotiations between them and the various governments. That's the main reason, but there's also a political aspect. Ullrmak is curious about you, and wants to meet you. But that's not something that a high chief does, Gluern added. It could be seen as an indulgence. Most of the great chiefs wouldn't care, but there are those who would use it to frame High Chief Ullrmak as a layabout. That's true too, Yelk nodded. Though it would be unlikely to result in rebellion. It would be more likely that Ullrmak would have to grant concessions. Okay, I understand, I said. But can I check out the dungeon before seeing the High Chief? Nash and Yelk turned to give me a look. The kind of look one gives a child who is trying to run before they can crawl. Actually, that was the plan, Gluern said. My brother's head snapped around to look at the chief in shock. Nash started to object, but Gluern held up a hand to stop him. Things are getting weird with the new dungeon area. The dungeon has shifted a total of 3 times since the boss has been encountered, but the hidden area and its entrance remain unchanged. We were hoping that the barrier would be able to contain the threat until the dungeon gets rid of it naturally, but that doesn't seem to be happening, Gluern sighed. High Chief Ullrmak is sending a team of over 20s to investigate the phenomena and destroy the boss. Over 20s? Yelk whistled softly, yes. And it would be better if they could take Nick along when they perform their initial investigation. There might be things he can shed light on. I'd rather he not take part in the fight, though, Gluern said. This isn't a time-sensitive mission, so it should be fine if you accompany them. Actually, Nash, you definitely should. You'd be able to help guide them to where you found Nick, right? Yeah, probably, Nash admitted. Good, hopefully this will shed some light on. The orcs continued discussing the plan, but I zoned out because of the blood rushing to my head. Here it was, the chance to find out more about what the hell happened to me. Even a hint might put me on the path to getting home. My mind was flooded with excitement at the possibility, and dread at the thought of finding nothing, and I'll grab some charcoal and paper to do rubbings, just in case. When are we setting out? Yelk asked. One of the over 20s has already arrived. The rest should be here within the next couple of days, so you'll be entering the dungeon by the end of the week, Gluern answered. That should give you plenty of time to prepare. We're not expecting any danger, but better safe than sorry, Nash nodded. Understood, Chief. All right, Nick, let's go get you registered as an adventurer. The Human from a Dungeon Chapter 11, The Adventurers Guild. It's hosted within a very plain-looking gray bricked building here in Naliva, but I'd heard that elsewhere the buildings get very fancy. It's said that in one of the gnomish countries their buildings are made of solid gold, but I don't know if I believe that. What's to stop people from shaving bits off when nobody's looking? Although, as one of the largest multinational organizations in the world, the Adventurers Guild could probably afford to replace the shaved bits of their buildings. It's still hard to imagine that they have ultra-luxurious buildings when faced with how mundane their branch in Naliva is, though. Things look just as plain on the inside as they do on the outside. I'd expected Nick to be underwhelmed, but his typically stoic face appeared enamored with every little detail surrounding us. The quest board, surrounded by adventurers looking for a good job to match their skills. The gathering area, where you can grab a bite to eat or a pint to drink before setting off. You normally wouldn't eat here after a job, because there are better places to eat in the village. I personally prefer Corno's fried food over what the Adventurers Guild has on offer. Nick seemed particularly interested in the Trader Pit, where an adventuring party was selling loot they'd gotten from a dungeon dive. We'd already explained to Nick that you can buy and sell stuff at the guild when he was being fussy about turning freelancer. But seeing is believing, I suppose. The pit's where I bought my axe. Hi there. Nima greeted us. How can I help you? Hi Nima, Yelk said. We'd like to register Nick as an adventurer. Oh, you're the human, aren't you? She asked. Nick stammered an affirmative. Most of the people that frequent Naliva are used to seeing Nima around, so it took me a second to realize what had the boy nervous. Then I realized that he didn't have anything not to be nervous about. Nima is notable for her beauty, wears barely anything, and above all else is 7 feet tall. Above all else, orc women don't typically get as tall as our men do, but Nima is related to Alern, so I guess it makes sense. That whole family is huge. If I remember right, she's his half-sister, but they're not close. Alern's dad ran off on Nima's mom or something. Considering how similar Nima and her mom look, I can't even begin to fathom why he would run off. Alright, so we'll have you fill out some forms, and then we'll get you connected to the cure guard to determine your level. Then we'll do your newbie brief. She explained. Oh okay, came Nick's suave reply. I couldn't help but grin. From Nick's height, there was no way to maintain proper eye contact and avoid staring at Nima's head-sized breasts. Instead, he was staring firmly at the counter like a well-trained pupper, trying to avoid gazing longingly at their owner's food. Most of the other races have difficulty not staring, and I suppose humans are no different. My amusement was cut short when I realized that I might have to have an awkward conversation with the boy about orc sexual compatibility. Namely, the lack thereof. Maybe I can pawn it off on Yelk. He's much more open about such discussions, and would probably be better at it. I glanced at him, but he was studying Nick with a slightly confused look on his face. Oh, right, he's a dunce when it comes to sexuality. Shit, here you go. Nima said as she set a packet on the counter. There are pencils at the table over there. Fill these out and bring them back, okay? Why yeah. Thank you, Nick stammered. Nima and I made eye contact and she smiled knowingly. I grinned in response as we turned to head to the gathering area. She had previously made it clear that she likes me, but I wasn't ready to commit just yet. I don't have the finances to give her the life she deserves. Instead, we'd made a deal that when I get to level 10 we'd try dating and see where things went. When you hit level 10, you get access to better paying jobs and 50% of the retail value of the goods you sell, which would give me enough money to support mom and properly court Nima. We'd made this deal last year when I was only level 6, and I'd been grinding hard ever since. Nick said as we got to one of the tables. I can't read this, what? I asked. I don't understand this writing, he clarified. But you speak perfect Orsish, how are you unable to read it? I demanded. Probably the same way you can't, Yelk said, causing me to flinch. This is something that I've been thinking about. Though. Why is it that you can speak Orsish, Nick? I'm not. I'm speaking English, Nick replied. I thought you were speaking English. What the hell is going on? That's what I would like to know. English? I'd never heard of English. Must be a language from his world or whatever. But in this world, there are only 8 languages. Orsish, Elvish, Daimon, Drow, Draken, Dwarven, Gnomish, and Ennealish. They're all similar enough that it's easy to learn to speak and understand them. Yelk taught me how to speak them when he got back from schooling around. It was pretty fun until we got to the writing part. I can't seem to wrap my head around letters and words, no matter what language they're in. Don't have that problem with math, though. Numbers are nice, maybe it's a skill? Yelk ventured. It's not on my skill list, though, Nick said. Yelk pondered for a moment. Is your skill list ability listed on your skill list? No. Then maybe whatever is allowing you to see your skill list is also automatically translating what you hear and say. Yeah, I interrupted impatiently. You might be able to speak all the languages. Congrats, whatever. Problem is, you can't read them. Have Yelk fill out the forms for you like he did for me. The two of them looked at me with blank expressions, as if they hadn't already thought of that solution and were surprised that I was the one that came up with it. I crossed my arms and glared back at them. What the hell are you looking at? You didn't think of that? I demanded. I'm supposed to be the dumb one. We're gonna be in real trouble if it turns out that I'm the smartest of the 3 of us. Fair enough, Yelk replied. But I'll have you know that dumb means you're not able to talk. So just by the merit of being able to yell at us, you're not. Whatever, I interrupted. Just get the fucking forms filled out. Yelk grinned at me and grabbed the forms from Nick. He began reading aloud as I sat down next to them. The questionnaire portion went by fairly easily, except for a couple of parts. We had to add our own answer to species, and there was some confusion when it came to the race part. Turns out that Nick's world had a different definition of race than ours, so Yelk explained that your race was based off of where your parents are based. So Nick is an American human, his children would also be American humans, but his grandchildren would be Nulavan humans. Assuming he found other humans and had children, and those children stuck around Nuliva, Yelk began to explain the various reasons why one's race was accounted for, and I zoned out. International diversity treaties and bans are boring. Instead, I thought about what life would be like with Nima. We'd date for a year or 2, then have a nice year-long engagement followed by a wedding. If all went well, I'd even planned out our first date. I'll come by with a gift, a nice 16-inch engraved hunting knife, and take her out to dinner at Corno's. Then we'll swing by the training arena and watch people spar until the sun goes down, and to wrap up the date we'll stargaze. If she still likes me afterward, then she'll decide what we do on the next date. Once we get engaged, we'll be moving in together. I'll probably have to knock down a wall to give us some more room in my bedroom. It'll be a pain, but we'd also get a bigger living room out of it. Well, unless her mom makes a fuss and has me move in with them instead. I don't think that'll happen, though, so if a guild can prove that they've hired a certain amount of Iratons, they'll get access to governmental jobs from Irita. And even bonuses. Yelk said. Anyways, onto the disclosures. First is the payment system. Until you're level 5, the guild will be taking a 20% commission on your jobs, and giving you a 1% discount on guild-related services. You also get 10% of retail for drops you sell to the guild. What guild-related services? Nick asked. Food, gear, and medical. Well, the medical that you have to pay for, at least, I replied. What medical stuff is free? Anything life-threatening. The stuff that isn't considered life-threatening, like rashes or cosmetic stuff, you've gotta pay for. The deals get better as you level up, too, Yelp explained. When you hit level 5, the commission drops down to 15% and you get a 5% discount, and 25% of retail on your drops, I added. At level 10, it's 10% on the commission, 10% on the discount, 50% of retail on the drops, and access to better paying jobs. Then at level 20, it gets even better. It's 5% commission, 65% of retail, a 15% discount, and no limitations on jobs. At that point, if you want a job, it's yours. Okay, I get it now, Nick said. But what are these jobs? I thought you just went in the dungeon and got stuff to sell. The jobs vary. There's jobs for going in the dungeon to find specific drops, exterminating monsters in the wastes, escorting travelers, and other things like that, I answered. The more intense the job's expected to be, the higher the level restriction and pay is. It's not a perfect system, though, so you should be careful about which jobs you accept. Fetch quests are an under 5's bread and butter, Yelk added, so basically, the higher my level, the less they take from my pay and the more benefits I actually get, Nick said. Alright, this next part's about the examinations, Yelk flapped a page. You agree to a quarterly review of your level as well as magical, physical, and mental health. You also understand that if you are found to have a health issue you will be required to get treatment before you can accept further jobs. You have the right to decline treatment, and the right to have your level checked at any time. Magical health? Nick asked. Yeah, I said. Like a curse or something wrong with your core, Yelk sorted the papers in front of Nick and said. Alright, we're just about through them all. There's still the stuff about the International Merchant Association, other associated guilds, and I stopped listening after Yelk mentioned the International Merchant Association. Woe be unto Nick if he asks a question about the IMA. Yelk will talk his weirdly round ears right off his head. Instead, I decided to check the job board. It would be a while before the over 20s were ready to go into the dungeon, so hopefully there'd be a nice simple job to take Nick on. I looked at the board and ignored everything without artwork on it. The pictures drawn by the autoscribe were great. Realistic and not stylized, so you know exactly what you're looking at. I grabbed a few promising ones, one about false mint, one about a tree with some fruits on it, and one regarding giant rats. I brought the 3 postings up to Nima. Hey, Nima. Yelk and Nick are still filling out the paperwork, so I'm checking out the jobs. Could you read these to me? I asked. She looked confused for a second before remembering my issue regarding the written word, and then she looked embarrassed for forgetting. Then there was a smidge of pity in her eyes. I don't like being pitted, but when it's coming from those beautiful eyes, I guess it's all right. Ah, sweetie, she replied. Of course I will. This first one is a gathering mission for false mint from the forest depths. 50 leaves are needed. Ah, the forest. North or south, it doesn't specify. Just need 50 false mint leaves from the forest. Okay, we might do that one. What's the next one about? Gathering yipples. They want a sack full. Where are the yipple trees? I scratched my neck. It had been years since I went gathering fruit, on the edge of the forest leading into the wastes, to the south, she answered, the south. That's good. Might do that one too. What about the rats? Let's see. There's a pack of giant rats harassing caravans in the wastes to the south. Reports indicate there's only about a dozen, and the poster is offering 2 copper per pelt delivered to the guild. It's a level 5 and over job. Well, that should be fine. Yelk and I are over 5s, so we can bring Nick along as a party member, right? I asked, leaning on the counter with my most charming smile. Of course, she smiled back. But you will be censured if he gets killed or crippled, though. Fat chance of that, I replied. Despite appearances, that little fucker can pack a wallop. What's this? Nima asked, feigning shock. The legendary Nash, giving praise to someone? He must be pretty capable, yeah. Laugh it up, I chuckled. Don't tell him I said that, though. He'll go and get an ego. My lips are sealed, she winked, our eyes met and we smiled. The rest of the world faded away for a moment, before Yulk's voice snapped me back to reality. I missed what he said, so I looked back to Nima. She looked confused as well, and I got a fuzzy feeling in my chest when I realized she missed it too. We'd been lost in each other's eyes. The forms, Yulk slowly stated. They're done. We're ready for the examinations. What were you two up to? I was accepting some jobs for us to do, to pass the time. We got herb and fruit gathering with some hunting in the wastes. Shouldn't take more than a day and a half, I said quickly. Herbs and fruit? I thought you guys only eat meat, Nick replied. Well, we fucking season it, we're not animals, I grumbled. And anyway, these jobs weren't posted by orcs, they were posted by traders and stuff, right? Well, what are we hunting? He asked. Giant rats out in the wastes. We're grabbing the plants on the way there. Why's it always fucking rats? Nick grumbled under his breath. Hey, I countered. This is an over 5 quest. Don't underestimate giant rats. They're more than just a nuisance, they'll take down prey twice your size without a sweat. The only reason you're gonna be able to do this job is 'cause Yulk and I are protecting you. Now let's get your exams done, so we can head out. Which one would you like to start with? Nima asked the human. I'd like to have my level assessed, please, he replied. Sure thing, she said cheerily as she reached into a drawer behind her. She pulled out a contraption and a metallic guild card and set them on the counter. The contraption that the guild uses to connect someone to the Kuragard is a strange-looking thing. It's a rectangular box with 6 stubby legs, 1 on each corner and 2 in the middle. Each leg is made of a different metal, and the box itself looks like it's made of obsidian. She inserted the card in a slot on the part of the box facing us and pressed her fingers into some indents on her side of the box. Blue light spilled out of the top of the box and formed a square in front of us. Then green lights shot out and entered the square, creating numbers, letters, and the palm of a hand. The light took on a mirror-like quality as it hardened, still hovering a few inches above the contraption. Then she fed the forms into the back of the box. All right, please place your hand on the handprint until you feel a slight electric shock, Nima said. Without saying anything, Nick reached out and placed his hand on the hardened light. It was a full 10 seconds before Nick winced slightly and withdrew his hand. I shared a look with Yulk. This thing was usually much faster. It made some weird noises that sounded a lot like birds chirping, and then the numbers and letters changed. Yulk and Nima looked at the letters and numbers with confusion. So did Nick and I, but that's only natural, considering our inability to read the damned things. Once the two readers recovered from their confusion, their eyebrows shot up. What is it? I asked, growing impatient. He's level 5, Yulk answered in a quiet voice. I looked at him intently, trying to figure out if he was joking. When I turned to look at Nima, her expression told me he wasn't. Is that rare? Nick asked. Yeah, it is, I replied. What's his class? Unknown, Nima said. Well, that figures, I chuckled, turning to Nick. Mine's unknown too. Has been ever since I hit level 7. Look, don't let your level get to your head. You're still inexperienced, and should follow our lead during the hunt. Yeah, he responded. I will. On the bright side, though, the quest level isn't a problem anymore. Smartass, I grumbled. Better to be a smartass than a dumbass, Yulk grinned. Alright, let's get the rest of the exams out of the way. Yeah, go on. I'm gonna hang out here for a bit, I said. Nima, Yelk, and Nick went to the medical portion of the guild hall while I sat at the gathering area. I stared at the 3 job posters. Level 5, huh? I can't help but be a little jealous. It had taken me so long to reach that milestone. So many monsters slain, so many friends lost. All Nick needed was a little training. It might have been even more depressing if we had trained him longer. I hope he at least lives up to the level. The human from a dungeon 12, day 3, I'm still trapped in the tree. The food and water I had are gone, and these damned rats are still waiting for me to come down. They've been taking shifts, some sleeping during the day and the rest sleeping at night. Every now and then they try climbing up after me, but a few well-placed kicks and pokes with my dagger thwart their efforts. I am tired, thirsty, and my ass is extremely sore due to the bark of this tree. They're still eating my pack animals, so it's unlikely I'll be able to outlast them. Eventually, I will fall from my perch, a miserable existence fated to meet a miserable end. Eaten by rats. If you find this, please avenge me. Make sure no one else shares my fate. Imler Tula. I closed the journal and put my pencil away. What an unfortunate thing to have to use a brand new journal for. I glared at the giant rats below me, and their beady red eyes glared right back. From up here, they looked a normal size, but in reality, they were only slightly smaller than myself. I'm tall for a gnome, 3 feet 6 inches in fact, and I shudder to think what could have happened if I had been even an inch shorter. My wagon and pack animals were still in view. The rats had sprung their ambush and killed both my narses before they could react. They had covered themselves in sand along the trail, and either hadn't noticed me or decided that the beasts of burden were the best targets. This, and some quick thinking, gave me barely enough time to scale this tree before I shuddered. The damage to the wagon is irreparable. Those teeth and claws had made short work of the wooden sides and cover. The wagon had cost me 50 silver, more than both the narses combined. The rats had broken it open like a cask, trying to get to the sweetmeats within. A small shipment for a certain orc chef in Niliva. I looked down at the 5 rats that were currently patrolling the base of the tree. Fuck you. I shouted to the vermin. They chittered back at me. I normally would have hired an adventurer escort, but business had taken a rotten turn as of late. My beefery had caught fire and I ended up having to pay to have it rebuilt as well as compensation for the workers who were injured. I had spent half of my remaining capital to fulfill this order. The freshly smelted metals that the Nulavan Adventurers Guild branch had ordered are fine, but I no longer have a way to transport them. I chuckled at my optimism. As if I had a need to transport them now. I am going to die. Exposure, starvation, or dehydration. It was a toss-up which would claim me first. I only hoped that I wouldn't weaken to the point of falling out of the tree before my untimely demise. Getting eaten to death promises to be a painful way to perish. I looked at the corpses of my narses. Hulk and Noble, they'd been with me for most of their lives. Never again would Hulk softly chomp my arm nor Noble softly blow my hair as I geared them up. They were rambunctious, like my own children. It's going to be hard for Talina to take care of them without me. I can only hope that my life insurance will let them live comfortably. The house is paid off, and I've still got enough capital to feed them for the month that it'll take before it kicks in. If another trader uses this route and finds my remains, it'll kick in even faster. Some movement in the corner of my eye caught my attention. A trio of people. 2 orcs and an elf were walking the path. Rescue? Or further tragedy? I weakly stood up and started waving my arms at them. Rats. Beware. Giant rats on the road. I screamed. The 3 stopped and looked at me. They were still too far away to make out their expressions, and I kept waving and shouting. I screamed at them to run and get help. They faced each other for a moment and then started jogging over. Adventurers? I didn't dare to hope. Perhaps they are simply foolish vagabonds who can't hear me properly and are about to join Hulk and Noble wherever the dead things go. My voice weakened to the point of a whisper as they drew closer and closer. I looked at the rats, and my stomach fell as they turned to greet the trio. My heart skipped a beat when a loud bang rang out. The rat I had been staring at was bisected, and wind rushed through my tree. I grabbed the trunk to keep from falling and watched two of the trio pull weapons from under their capes. An axe and a sword. I almost jumped for joy. I am rescued. Of the two melee fighters, the orc was definitely more skilled. I watched in awe as he fluidly carved through his opponents. The second orc was obviously a sorcerer, casting spells at rats who were trying to flank the fighters. The spells were plenty powerful, too. The elf wasn't bad with its blade, but then something happened that made my jaw drop open. A rat charged the elf, and it cast a fireball that instantly fried the damned thing. A magic user with a blade? Will wonders never cease? My celebration was short-lived, though. More and more giant rats joined the fray. 5 became 15, then 30. I watched in anticipation as the adventurers kept fighting and fighting. The end goal of the rats seemed to be to wear them down enough to land a killing blow. When one considers the casualties, it's a disgusting tactic. But vermin don't seem to care about morality. Just meat, but the adventurers didn't seem to get tired. If anything, they were getting better at working as a team. The sorcerer was launching spells from both of his hands, and the spell sword was using his magic and weapon simultaneously. The orc with an axe was using it like a scalpel, carving just enough of each rat's flesh to be fatal without expending unnecessary effort. The change in demeanor was impressively seamless. Before I knew it, 50 rats lay dead at the feet of my rescuers. I clambered down the tree and approached them, being careful not to step on any of the viscera that was strewn across the ground. The orc was wiping down his axe. The elf was holding his bloodied blade, looking a bit lost. I pulled a rag out of my tunic and offered it to him with a grin. It wasn't until we got close to each other that I noticed something was wrong. His eyes were blue but lacked the ethereal glisten that an elf's would have, and his ears were rounded. He returned my grin, and I noticed that the flat teeth one would see in an elf's mouth were flanked by sharp ones. I carefully maintained my grin even though terror gripped my heart. It isn't right to be afraid of one's rescuers, but I couldn't help it. This thing was an unfamiliar mare, and had demonstrated that it was very proficient in combat. "Thank you," it said. "Why, you're welcome," I stammered through my now false grin. Thank you. I thought I was a goner. "You look nervous," the sorcerer said with a knowing smile. "Never seen a human before." "Of course he hasn't," the one with an axe replied. "You think a trader's gonna have seen more than an entire village of adventurers, a human?" I asked. "Introductions, then. I am Yelk Alta, this is my brother Nash," the sorcerer began, gesturing to the orc with an axe. "And this is Nicodemus Smith, the newest adopted member of Clan Alta." "He is a human, oh. I see. Well, I am Imler Tula of the Tula Transportation Company." "Pleasure to meet you, truly. I don't wish to be a burden, but I don't suppose you have food and drink?" I asked, slumping to the ground as my fatigue caught up with me. "We have drink and some yipples. We'll have to replace what you eat on our way back, though." "Here, eat your fill while we gather the hides," Nash said, tossing a sack and a water bag to me. "Is that your wagon?" "Thank you so much." "And yes it is, but the rats got to it," I explained as I gulped down water gratefully. "I'll have a look at it since I'm not great with bending over," Yelk said. "Okay, let's get to work, Nick," Nash commanded. I counted about 40, I counted 52, the human replied. The axe-wielding orc looked down at the human for a moment and then at the corpses of the giant rats. He mumbled to himself for a while and then scoffed, 54. We're both wrong, he grumbled. Whatever, let's get skinning. Nick watched Nash closely as he took the pelt from the first giant rat, and then began to copy what he had seen. What an interesting creature. I had assumed that he was a young elf due to his height and skin tone. Elves usually get to be about 6.5 feet tall. As I studied him closer, I saw even more differences, though. He had hair on his arms, and stubble growing out of his face. Like a freakishly tall dwarf who had shaved himself recently. There were tales of such practices on the south continent. Rumor has it that it's because of the heat. Maybe the southern dwarfs call themselves humans? No, that doesn't explain the height and the teeth. I munched on yipples while the others carved the rats up. I'm not typically a fan of fruits, but these were the most delicious yipples I've had in my entire life. After I filled my belly and rested for a bit, I got to work helping Nick and Nash gather the pelts. How did there get to be so many? Nick asked. They breed fast. This is probably only about a few generations worth, I answered. Yup. They start out sneaky and timid, but the more of them there are, the more desperate they get for food. That's when they get dangerous, Nash added. Why didn't they try to run away, though? Blood frenzy. It's what separates monsters from animals. If you get attacked by a pack of wolves, you can survive if you kill enough of them. The rest will run away. If you get attacked by a pack of dire wolves, you're going to have to kill all of them to survive. Monsters don't run, Nash said. Well, if you're quick enough you can run away, I said with a laugh. Or scamper up a tree and hope some adventurers come along. We all chuckled and silence fell as the enormity of our task drew our attention. It was messy work too, and once we were done, Yelk approached us. How's the wagon? Nash asked. It'd be nice not to have to carry 50 pelts back to the village, right? I thought we were going to be dealing with a dozen max. Yelk chuckled. Anyway, the axles, sides, and roof are all shot, but the wheels and bed are fine. If we can get the wheels off the axles and flip it, I can probably fix the axles with mend. Dunno how we're going to secure our cargo and pull it, though. Nick and I can be the beasts of burden. You and, Nash trailed off, looking at me. Imler Tula, I replied, right. You and Imler Tula can keep the stuff from falling off, or let us know when it does so we don't leave it in the dust, he finished. I don't suppose you'd be able to pull the original cargo as well? I tentatively asked. It's about 100 pounds of metals for the Adventurers Guild, shouldn't be a problem. Gonna have to make a stop for the yipples, though. Nick and I will rest while the two of you grab some more, and so it went. We managed to take the wheels off the wagon and get it flipped over, and Yelk was able to repair the axles with a spell. We affixed the wheels back onto the wagon and loaded everything back up. I said a quiet goodbye to Hulk and Noble while Nick and Nash used what was left of the harnesses to start pulling the wagon. As I began to walk next to the wagon, I struggled to fight back tears of joy. I survived.